France is elite. In the modern day, they produce arguably the widest pool of consistently elite footballing talent on the planet. But, contrary to popular belief, that has not always been the case. All of that, symbolically, definitively changed on July 12, 1998, the day the unthinkable happened. Brazil, the kings of the game, were dismantled 3-0. Not by Germany, or Italy, or Argentina, but by France.
A defining performance by Zinedine Zidane.
A man exuding elegance that, funnily enough, was deemed to not be good enough for high-level football only 2 years prior, sent the crowd into delirium. When Didier Deschamps hoisted the World Cup trophy, more than 1 million people surged down the Champs-Élysées chanting, this victory, given historical context at the time, was simply improbable. From being outsiders for decades, mocked as underachievers, sidelined by their own press, to being one of the most diverse and talented nations to ever grace the footballing world and making extremely light work of the greatest footballing nation to ever exist. France defied the odds on home soil. The story of how they reached that night is as dramatic as the final itself. Welcome to the rise of the great French dynasty. Football first arrived in France in the late 19th century, introduced by Englishmen who brought the new game across the channel. At first, however, football struggled to make a mark in French society, and this is because the sport was viewed as a pastime of the bourgeois elite, often clashing with the secular republican values of the French mainstream. However, France was front and center in 1904 when the organization to rule them all was formed. Along with Belgium, Denmark, the Netherlands, Spain, Sweden, and Switzerland, FIFA was formed. In fact, Frenchman Robert Gourin was the first ever FIFA president. The nation played its first official international match in the same year, a 3-3 draw with Belgium. Not bad, but make no mistake, France were far from good. 2 years later, when France faced England in a friendly, France were battered 15-0. The scoreline, it sounds the furthest thing from friendly, but don't be too quick to assume things. The English, they were charitable. English reports suggest that, apparently, England missed a penalty on purpose late on in the game because open play goals were favored and penalties were looked down on. Some things, they never change. Also, this is not even France's heaviest defeat. That came 3 years later, 17-1 against Denmark in the semi-finals of the Olympic Games. Any Danes watching or listening? This is your ammo. This French team, it had a lot of problems. Parisian players refused to pass to their provincial teammates. There was a lot of bad blood in the camp. Ironically, it was World War I that helped accelerate the spread of football amongst the French. During the Great War, British and French soldiers fought side by side in the trenches and would play the game during rest periods. By the war's end, there was no mistaking that football was there to stay in France. The Coupe de France was launched in 1918, the French Football Federation was established in 1919, the culture truly began to shift. Jules Rimet became the second French FIFA president in 1921, and that name, it might ring a couple of bells to some. He's the man that created the World Cup, and this trophy, the original World Cup trophy, was named after him. However, French football in the early days was still characterized by a series of hits and misses. Mostly misses. Actually, only misses. France debuted at the original World Cup in 1930, group stage exit. In 1934, first round exit. In 1938, France hosted the World Cup for the first time. Home support had hopes that Les Bleus might emulate the previous host, Italy, who won. Those dreams, however, were dashed by Italy in the quarterfinals. So, France weren't exactly phenomenal in the early days, but again, French representation was extremely influential on the international stage. The UEFA European Championship, probably the second biggest football competition in world football, like the World Cup, was created by a Frenchman. French Football Federation's Secretary General, Henri Delaunay. This trophy, too, is named after him. The idea was proposed in 1927, but after years of deliberation, the first edition only took place in 1960. And the timing, it couldn't have been better, because it came just in time for France's first golden generation. A generation that came to life 2 years prior in the 1958 World Cup in Sweden, led by two phenomenal players who became French legends, Raymond Kopa and Just Fontaine. Kopa, a classic number 10 and Champions League winner with Real Madrid. Fontaine, a Moroccan-born striker, a real predator with a powerful strike. Together, they were devastating. In France's opening game, they demolished Paraguay 7-1, with Fontaine netting a hat-trick. His antics would continue to the point that by the semi-finals, he had scored 8 goals. And just for the record, that alone would have won him the Golden Boot in 17 out of the 22 World Cups to date. Sadly, it wasn't meant to be for this French side, as they ran into one of football's final bosses in that semi-final, a 17-year-old Pelé. The teenager scored a hat-trick of his own in the 5-2 win and dashed French dreams yet again, going on to lift the trophy for himself. Fontaine, clearly reeling from the disappointment, banged 4 past Germany in the third-place playoff to finish the tournament with 13 goals, a top-scoring record that stands to this day. 13 is nuts. And even further, he only played in 1 World Cup in his entire career and currently sits in 4th place for all-time scorers in World Cup history. It tells you all you really need to know, doesn't it? For their efforts, Kopa and Fontaine secured 1st and 3rd place in the Ballon d'Or rankings in 1958, a European-only award at that point. And so, the golden generation had to regroup. Hosted on local grounds, France reached the semi-finals in the inaugural European Cup in 1960, but lost to Yugoslavia in dramatic fashion in front of a packed Parc des Princes crowd. After taking a 4-2 lead, France suffered a stunning collapse, conceding 3 goals in the final 15 minutes to lose 5-4. The end of the 1960 tournament also effectively marked the end of that first golden generation. And as this generation faded into the distance, so too did French football. The promise of the late 1950s gave way to frustration for the next 3 decades. France failed to make a mark at any major tournaments, mostly because they failed to qualify for most of them, and the ones they did qualify for were met with early exits. Take the World Cup for example. 62, absent. 66, group stage. 70 and 74, no-show. 78, group stage. The Euros painted a similar picture. 64, 68, 72, 76, 80, no dice. By the mid-1970s, a generation of French fans had grown up without really seeing their national team on the sport's biggest stages. But then, the 80s rolled along and something happened. A new group of players began to hover towards the forefront, the second golden generation. Of those players, one name was turning heads more than others. A talented young midfielder named Michel Platini. Michel Platini was a playmaker of rare elegance and prolific scoring ability who would become one of the greatest of all time. He was simply sensational on the ball, as you can see. His agility and trickery was timeless, the sort of player that would dominate in any generation. He was supported by a legendary midfield group, simply known as Le Quart Magique, the Magic Square. Michel Platini, Jean Tigana, Alain Giresse, and Louis Fernandez each brought a different strength. Platini, the attacking inspiration and goalscorer, Giresse, the creative link, Tigana, the box-to-box runner, and Fernandez, the ball winner and enforcer. Michel Hidalgo, the coach, figured out how to get these 4 stars playing in harmony, and because of this, France unlocked its potential and reaped the rewards. And what were those rewards, you ask? The 1984 UEFA European Championship, France's first ever major international trophy. The home crowd were treated to 9 Michel Platini goals in 5 matches. He scored in every match, including a hat-trick in 2 of them. In the final, at the Parc des Princes, the same venue of their embarrassing collapse to Yugoslavia 24 years prior, France dismantled Spain 2-0 and made history. French football had finally arrived. Either side of the Euros, France made deep runs in the World Cup. In the 1982 World Cup in Spain, France faced Germany in the semi-finals, producing one of the most famous matches in World Cup history along the way, commonly labeled as the greatest game of all time. A 1-1 draw in normal time ended 3-3 by the time extra time was over. 4 goals in extra time, 2 goals apiece, is simply sensational. France, they may not use that word though. They scored twice in the first half of extra time, only to concede twice and ultimately lose on penalties. In 1986, in Mexico, France again made it to the semi-finals. However, yet again, it was Germany that would end their charge. By then, Platini was a global superstar, winner of 3 consecutive Ballon d'Or awards in 83, 84, and 85. Here's a fun fact for you. Platini also holds the record for the most corruption cases in high-level football governance from a multiple Ballon d'Or winner. I haven't done the research to fact-check that last statement, but I think it's true. Despite the good times, like clockwork, France fell on hard times. Fast forward to the early 90s, and after failing to even qualify for Euro 88, meaning no title defense was possible, Platini became coach and guided France to the 92 Euros group stage exit. We've returned to the dark times. The FFF then appointed Gérard Houllier to lead the 1994 World Cup qualifications, and that campaign started off quite well, but it would end in disaster, in a manner so dramatic that it's often just referred to as La Tragédie de Novembre, the tragedy of November. Going into the final 2 matches of the 1994 qualifying, France needed just 1 point from their last 2 games, both of which were at the Parc des Princes, to secure a World Cup ticket. The opponents were Israel and Bulgaria, neither of which on paper should have been a problem. Well, in the first game, 3-2 to Israel. Awful, but not disastrous. Bulgaria didn't know what was about to hit them. November 17, 1993, 2-1 for Bulgaria. Crisis. Real life crisis. What made this situation so much worse was that France took an early lead through Eric Cantona. Bulgaria equalized, but that shouldn't have mattered. All France needed to do was keep the ball and not do anything silly, and they would have gotten their golden ticket. Apparently, nobody told this to winger David Ginola. Deep in Bulgaria's corner, with seconds left, for some reason, he attempted a cross into the box. Instead of playing keep ball, Bulgaria countered, scored, and the entire team was inconsolable. The home crowd fell silent in disbelief. Now, here's the thing about all this. Ginola, he made a mistake, sure. But since then, most recountings of this tale seem to blame him, and him alone, for this incident. Not his team that failed to defend the counter, nor the first Bulgaria goal. It also, of course, didn't help that Ginola was a very photogenic man. He was always, incorrectly I might add, seen as nothing more than a pretty boy by many in the French public. And it wasn't just the masses that blamed Ginola for this goal. Gérard Houllier, the coach of the French team, infamously labeled Ginola as the quote-unquote murderer of French hopes. He even put this in his biography, which led to Ginola suing him for defamation. It was all kind of crazy. Now, France was in their worst period in about 2 decades, something they had to change very, very quickly, because only 5 years from La Tragédie de Novembre, they were set to host the 1998 World Cup. But fear not, unbeknownst to the world at large, the French Football Federation had long known about their shortcomings and had a few tricks up their sleeve. In the late 70s, just before the Platini golden era, French football authorities knew they needed to fix something within and improve how players were developed and integrated. The pipeline of talent was immense, but it needed care and structure. An idea was formulated to create a national center of football whereby the very best youth players are selected and coached during the most crucial years in development. This would then act as a pipeline for elite clubs and feed into the national team. The idea was that in doing so, maybe, just maybe, every generation of French footballers would be golden. And so, in 1998, France opened the Institut National du Football de Clairefontaine, or simply Clairefontaine. the crown jewel of French football development just outside of Paris. The poster child of this system is someone you may have heard about before, Thierry Henry. Nicolas Anelka is another name that rings bells. In fact, he was actually seen as the bigger talent between the two in those early days, but this is not that story. At a high level, I can't stress enough that the French Football Federation's efforts to produce world beaters was a nationwide effort. Several such facilities across the country were popped up as the FFF's networks aimed to maximize their reach. Significantly, as the youth academies cast a wide net for talent, they naturally brought in boys from all backgrounds, including many from immigrant families or France's overseas territories. The result was that by the late 90s, the French football team was not only stacked with young talent, but also represented much of what everyday France actually looks like. Players of African, Caribbean, Pacific Island, and European heritage, all wearing the tricolore jersey. This diversity led to the affectionate nickname Black Blanc Beurre, or Black White Arab. This was the new France. If one person embodied France's rebuilding into a championship-tier team, it was Aimé Jacquet. Jacquet had long been a successful coach by the time he was approached by the FFF, with 3 French First Division titles to his name. In the fallout of the 1993 failure, he took charge. He was pragmatic, focused, and most importantly, ignored outside hype. He knew that France had talented individuals but needed a team above all else. Thus, he was willing to make controversial decisions to achieve the right balance and chemistry. In a series of bold first moves, he sidelined several of France's biggest names, including captain Eric Cantona, Jean-Pierre Papin, another Ballon d'Or winner, and David Ginola. All of them were sent packing. The reasoning behind this was simply due to Jacquet aiming to minimize risk and unpredictability in his side. Ginola may have been over-criticized for his ill-thought-out cross that fateful night in November, but it was a costly mistake nonetheless. The Cantona situation was a little bit more nuanced. Cantona was not only the captain, but also undoubtedly the most famous player of the mid-90s in that French team and a borderline deity at Manchester United. But historically, he was always capable of losing his temper. A kung fu kick to a loudmouth Crystal Palace fan in 1995 proved just that. For that particular incident, he received a 9-month ban. When Cantona returned from his ban, Jacquet had a tough call to make: stick with his young, evolving team or bring back Cantona. He chose the former, and the French public lost their minds. Aimé Jacquet did not care. His decisions were vindicated when France reached the semi-finals of the 1996 UEFA Euros, only losing to penalties to the Czech Republic. Jacquet clearly saw something that not all of us were privy to, because his replacement for Cantona was Zinedine Zidane. And Zidane certainly wasn't seen as a world-class player by the masses at that point. Famously, Kenny Dalglish wanted to bring Zidane to Premier League champions Blackburn Rovers in 1995. But Rovers owner Jack Walker famously said, quote, "Why do you want to sign Zidane when we have Tim Sherwood?" A year later, in '96, according to Barry Silkman, Zidane's agent, he was offered to Newcastle United, the club Ginola was playing for. However, it was believed that he was not good enough for English football. This was the same year that he won the French First Division Player of the Year, by the way. Back to the national team. The French press was not sold on Jacquet's vision. As hosts, France did not have to qualify for the tournament, so no scandals there. Although this didn't stop media outlets from scrutinizing every friendly performance in the lead-up. Robert Pires, another one of the younger players at the time, once spoke on the general atmosphere their head coach had to deal with, specifically regarding one of France's biggest newspapers, L'Équipe. Quote, "We knew that L'Équipe had an agenda against Aimé Jacquet. They didn't think that he was good enough. They questioned everything he did, all his choices, all his tactics. It became really nasty and personal too." End quote. The atmosphere around Les Bleus in early 1998 was tense. But Jacquet remained resolute. He protected his players behind closed doors and to the press. He held candid meetings with them and shared his blueprint for winning the World Cup. He spoke of trust, hard work, and destiny. And right on time for the big opener. Just like that, the players began to believe. Alright, that's enough context. Let's get into how things actually looked on the pitch before the first ball was kicked. Tactically, Jacques' France was conservative, but effective. On paper, he started almost every match with a different formation. He started with a 4-3-3, switched to a 4-2-3-1, then to a deep 4-4-2 with a double pivot, then a 4-3-2-1, then a 4-4-2 diamond. None of that mattered to him. Formation was simply just a paper thing. The key was flexibility. In goal was Fabien Barthez. His bold head granted luck, which is not a derogatory statement. His teammates literally rubbed and kissed his head before games. A back four typically consisting of Lilian Thuram, two of Frank Leboeuf, Laurent Blanc or Marcel Desailly and Bixent Lizarazu. In the midfield, Didier Deschamps, Emmanuel Petit, Patrick Vieira and Christian Karembo. Zidane was given license to roam in the pocket in each of these setups. He was really the only constant. And Yuri Djorkaeff, Stéphane Guivache, Christophe Dugarry, Thierry Henry, David Trezeguet, Robert Pires, and Bernard Diomede made up the rest of the attackers. As I said, Jacques cared less about rigid formation labels and more about defensive organization and quick transitions. He built from the back using France's superior technical ability. France's defense was physically imposing and tactically astute. In the offense, the plan was to be efficient with their use of the ball rather than free scoring, using Zidane's brilliance to create chances, capitalizing on set pieces and moments of individual skill. In theory, quite basic. In practice, very difficult. Nowhere was Jacques' vision of unity and selflessness more visible than within Christophe Guivache. His tireless work rate and runs were essential in creating space for Zidane. He never scored a single goal all tournament, which I guess is customary for French strikers in World Cups. But he had a very specific role and stuck to it. Jacques really trusted this group. Testament to that was, by the time the World Cup kicked off, David Ginola was arguably the best player in the Premier League, and many in France had long forgiven him. Still, Jacques stuck with his picks, and it's a good thing he did. Opening the tournament on June 12, 1998, France faced South Africa. It was SA's first World Cup, but don't let that fool you. In their first ever AFCON, only 2 years prior in 1996, they won. In their second, only months prior to this World Cup, they were runners-up. It could have been a shaky event, the sort of event that France were accustomed to losing so frequently over the years. Nonetheless, France secured a well-fought 3-0 win. 4-0 to Saudi Arabia and 2-1 to Denmark followed, which meant that France coasted into the round of 16 unscathed. 21-year-old Thierry Henry emerged as France's top scorer with 3 goals. The future was secure, no doubt about that. Things got a little bit tricky from here though. I skipped over this, but in the Saudi Arabia match, Zidane managed to get himself sent off for a stamp, earning a 2-match suspension. One was served versus Denmark, and now France had to enter the knockouts without him, and France met Paraguay next. This match was a true test. Paraguay were organized and stubborn. Their goalkeeper, José-Louis Chilavert, did not offer an inch for 114 minutes, but then history was made. Laurent Blanc scored a golden goal, a tiebreaker that instantly decides a match that goes to extra time. Interestingly, this was the first of its kind in World Cup history. The quarterfinal was massive. France versus Italy. France welcomed Zidane back from suspension, but even his creativity couldn't break the deadlock. It was an intense match of football. France had the upper hand, but after 90 minutes and extra time, the score remained 0-0. In the penalty shootout, both teams had penalties saved, but Italy were ultimately the ones who cracked. Luigi Di Biagio hit the bar, and France were in the semis. By now, doubts about Aimé Jacquet's methods had evaporated. The French public were fully behind their man and their team. France faced the tournament's surprise package next, Croatia, the country's first World Cup appearance since gaining independence. Again, this could have gotten very shaky. Early in the second half, Croatia stunned the home fans as Davor Šuker slipped behind the defense in the 46th minute. The Stade de France fell silent, but literally only for a minute. So, I want you to brace yourself because what I'm about to describe here surely constitutes as nothing other than divine intervention. Off the ensuing kickoff, France went on the offensive straight away, and right back Lilian Thuram, of all people, stepped up. Just inside the area, he battled his way through and it was all square. 20 minutes later, he lashed onto another ball just outside the area and curled a precise left-footed dagger right into the hearts of Croatia. 2-1 France. Get this, Thuram had never scored for France before, and he never scored for France ever again. 142 games for his country, these were his only 2. How? Divine intervention. Only explanation. For the first time ever, France were through to the World Cup final, but their last test was undoubtedly the biggest yet. Brazil, the definitive footballing nation. 4-time winners, current holders, overwhelming favorites whenever they step on the pitch. Ronaldo Nazario, aged 21, the holder of the Ballon d'Or, with chatter of the future GOAT already surrounding his every move, stood in France's way. However, there was an extreme twist to the tale. Hours before the final, Ronaldo reportedly suffered a medical emergency in the team hotel, convulsing, even foaming at the mouth. News didn't travel as fast back then, and bits and pieces were being released as the day went on. Eventually, news began to spread that Brazil had withdrawn his name from the squad. French players learned of the drama only on the way to the stadium. The best player in the world, for the reigning best team in the world, may not even be on the pitch to face you? This kind of news could either disrupt or uplift. France evidently were determined to not have it do either, which is a good thing, because at kickoff, there he was. There have been a lot of rumors that have swirled around over the years regarding what actually went down here. Some say Ronaldo was having a bad reaction to a specific treatment. Some say he was nervous. Some say he was poisoned. Some say the only reason he was on the pitch was because there was a ton of marketing done around him guiding Brazil to victory, and brands such as Nike forced him to play despite being ill. Whatever the reason is, to this day, nothing has been definitively confirmed. However, Brazil were visibly shaken. A notion backed up by Brazilian defender Cesar Sampaio. Quote, "We were so worried, we were not even at 50% of our ability in the final." End quote. It is a shame, but regardless of that, none of this can shortchange the magnitude of performance the world was about to witness, because when the match actually kicked off, France were the only team in the competition. The French midfield completely smothered Brazil. Zidane was easily finding space to work, and in the 27th minute, when he got his head on a petit cross, the stadium erupted. And just before halftime, he did it again. The unthinkable was unfolding. From the outside looking in, you could argue that this was France's easiest game of the tournament. Brazil simply had nothing to offer. Even when Marcel Desailly received a red card, Brazil could not penetrate. Brazil's desperation began to peak, and they paid the price for it. In the 90th minute, as the game entered stoppage time, France delivered the finishing blow. A precise counterattack saw Vieira slide the ball to Emmanuel Petit, who went on to bury the Brazilians in front of 75,000 bewildered spectators. Few could have predicted this outcome. Many were still in a state of disbelief, but the pinch they needed came when Didier Deschamps climbed the podium. All the media backlash, all the doubters, all those years of disappointment, the anxiety of being left behind as Brazil, Argentina, Germany, Italy, all those within the elite looked to leave them behind. France were now part of the club, and victory was sweet. In the aftermath of the World Cup, Zidane was awarded a well-deserved Ballon d'Or, which isn't too bad for a Newcastle United reject. And the party did not end there. France were now at the top of the pile, and for the first time ever, they managed to stay there. 2 summers after the World Cup victory, they entered UEFA Euro 2000. There were a few changes, but one of them was a big one. Aimé Jacquet chose to retire and become the technical director of the FFF. The man rocked up, altered the trajectory of his country's sporting history, and decided that He had better things to do than listen to Einsteins in the press give him nonsense. His assistant, Roger Lemaire, took over as head coach and maintained the core of the World Cup squad, because why fix something that isn't broken? France were on a mission to be only the second nation to hold both the World Cup and the European Championship title at the same time. Only Germany had achieved this. France, of course, rose to the occasion, and it was all the usual heroes. Zidane was rampant. Henry was ruthless. The only match they lost was against the Netherlands, and it was in the group stages after they had already qualified for the next round. Spain fell in the quarterfinals. Portugal fell in the semifinals. In the final, they faced an old rival, Italy, and for the first time, had a rough time. By the 90th minute, Italy were leading, and it did look like they were about to go all the way. In fact, the families of all the Italian players were already celebrating on the touchline and in the stands, but France had one more miracle in them. 94 minutes played. A long ball was knocked down to Sylvain Wiltord, who saved the day by sneaking the ball under the Italian keeper. The Italians were deflated. Momentum swung to France, and under golden goal rules, we all knew what this meant. In the 103rd minute, Robert Pires, a man who only came on late in the game when France was down, by the way, slices through the Italian defense, cuts it back to David Trezeguet, and he rifles it into the roof of the net. It was a picture-perfect golden goal, and it meant France were champions. Spare a thought for the Italians, mere minutes from winning, but now defeated. France, on the other hand, were rampant. Forget golden generations. This period was just pure, unadulterated, unequivocal gold. You'll notice that the tone of that last chapter shifted tremendously from the previous one. No longer was I talking about France with an air of uncertainty, doubt, almost pity for all the near misses. The situation from then on was one of expectation. There was an air of inevitability to it. France, through their focused efforts to turn their country into a talent factory, to trust in each other, to embrace their diversity and claim it as one of their biggest strengths, converted them into a global superpower. Lilian Thuram later reflected on how 1998's victory made French people of all origins feel that they all belong to France's story. Quote, "We were all France that day," end quote. The craziest thing is that most of the stars from this team were nowhere near their best yet and had long, incredible careers packed with success. Henry, Zidane, Vieira, Pires, Thuram, Trezeguet, none of them were over 25 at the 98 World Cup. On a sporting level, other countries took notice of Clairefontaine. Aimé Jacquet's methods, once ridiculed, are now a case study in team building and togetherness. The legacy of France's most golden period raised the standards. The country has had its ups and downs. The 2002 World Cup was a disappointment with a group stage exit, for example. But the roots that were planted all those years ago took them straight to the finals of the 2006 World Cup. That is what true succession looks like. And when it comes to this nation, succession is a fascinating thing, isn't it? 1998 was a great year for French football. Kylian Mbappe was born.